On today's episode, we sit down with Carmen Cedeño. She's a senior director of demand generation at Alma, a mental health startup backed by some of the biggest investors in venture capital. She joined when the marketing team was only 4 people. Today, that marketing team is 50 people strong, and the company has over 500 employees. So she talks a lot about what the growth has been like to get from that point to this point, and all the different levels of building the marketing team and marketing engine along the way. She also talked through how she's been able to get budget for her marketing team and what those conversations are like behind the scenes. There's also a great story that she tells about how they were able to actually book $4 million in attributable revenue based on a marketing program that she ran. And at the end, we wrap up with some career reflections that are really candid and really honest about what it's taken to get to where she is today. If you get just a little bit of value from this episode, the best thing you do is pay it forward by saying to a friend that you think might get value from it as well. And of course, if you want to like the video on YouTube, subscribe there, or give us a rating on Spotify, we'll always appreciate that. Let's get into the episode. Well, today I'm really excited. I am joined by Carmen Cedeño. She is the senior director of demand generation at Alma, which has been a rocket ship of a startup. They're backed by some of the best investors in venture, Insight, Primary, Box Group, First Round, Tusk, and I know there's more that I'm missing there. Before that, she was senior demand gen manager at HackerOne, also a fast-growing startup. And she's just spent basically her entire career understanding and studying demand gen and marketing. So really excited to have you here today, Carmen. How's it going?
Yeah, it's going good. Thanks for having me, Jason. Super excited to have this conversation with you.
Yeah, I'm really looking forward to it. So let's talk about Alma here for a second. So you joined there pretty early, right? They were a Series B company at the time. How many employees were there when you joined, and what did the team look like?
Yeah, so when I joined Alma, which was in 2020, so in the middle of the pandemic, the company was only about 40 people, and the marketing team was only 4. I was the 4th marketer to join, and obviously at that scale, we're all wearing multiple hats and doing everything ourselves. There's really no room for error or for hiding or anything, because everything you do is so visible and you're such a small team. So we were a pretty small team. It was our VP of marketing, who is still at Alma. We had a general marketing manager, a social media manager, and then I came in to scale the provider side of the business, which is the B2B side.
And I guess real quick too, why don't you give the background on what Alma is? Because when you say provider, that could confuse some folks. So give the background on what Alma is, and then tell us about what the team looks like today.
Yeah, so Alma is a mental health care company focused on driving affordable and accessible care to folks who are looking to use their insurance benefits to find a therapist in the United States. And the way that the business works is that we have a directory where consumers can go and find a therapist that meets their needs. So that's like the consumer side, and we have a consumer growth team. And then there's also the provider side, or the therapist side, which is about helping therapists grow a thriving private practice. So we help them with insurance, credentialing, basically all the billing and admin support that they would need to run their private practice. So those are the 2 different sides of the business. And I focus more on the provider side, so bringing therapists to join the Alma network so folks can find them in a directory. And then we have another team that focuses on driving that consumer. So it's kind of like that supply and demand, where I'm part of the supply, and the consumer growth team focuses on the demand. And now the team is 50 people, so we have 50 marketers. So it's definitely grown quite a lot. And we have a lot of specialists, which has been amazing. My boss likes to joke that it's kind of like the great unhiring of certain people, right? Because when you're a smaller team, you're doing all these multiple jobs, and as you start to hire specialists, it's like you start to unhire yourself in a lot of areas. So that's the size of the marketing team, and then the company is about 500 people now. So that, we've also grown exponentially as a company overall.
Yeah, so more than 10x growth, just headcount wise, for the team along that time. You guys are Series D now, right?
Yes, that's right. Yep.
Man, that's amazing. So I guess you talked about this concept of unhiring, which I like that term. I haven't heard that one before. So do you remember any of those moments over the last few years where you were like, oh shoot, like I just had to unhire or just unhired myself or I need to do it, like what that shift was like?
Oh my gosh, yes. I mean, my boss is full of all these great sayings. Like a second one she likes to say is giving your Legos away. And that's what I think about as well, where I had moments like that, I think, every quarter at Alma. It's kind of, stabilized a bit now in the last year because as the company matures, so does my tenure and so does so do my responsibilities. But I remember when I first joined, I was very focused on standing up programs and the channels that were going to fuel growth for the business. And quickly I realized, well, in order to do this, we need a solid foundation and we need to get a marketing automation platform. So the first way I unhired myself was by looking for a marketing operations expert who is still working with us to this day. And she set up Marketo for us. And then the second area that I unhired myself was really in the area of performance marketing and driving paid campaigns. I was like, I need someone who is much better than I am doing this. It's much smarter than me. And I was okay to admit that in order to fuel the growth. Like I basically crawled so whoever comes in can run and take these channels to the next level. So that's the other area I unhired myself. And that was actually a relief for me because it's a channel that requires such deep and technical expertise in terms of like paid search, paid social, and we have a really solid team now. And then the third area I unhired myself was in the area of kind of campaign management, which is kind of the classic demand gen motion of nurture campaigns and engaging leads to pass them off to sales. And I have a solid campaign marketing manager on the team now who is just really great at driving campaigns that drive a lot of growth, better growth than I've been able to drive in my career. So, I think about those moments being the moments that I unhired myself and sort of the opportunity that offered for me to focus on other areas of the business, like forecasting, headcount planning, thinking about what does Alma need 12 months from now versus thinking about short term. It really unlocked a lot of just headspace for me to focus on other areas where I could also flex my skills and learn about other things that I didn't know about. So that's been really rewarding.
Yeah, I think when you go through this process of unhiring yourself and as the company's going through this type of scale, it's really tricky because you have to learn how to hire specialists that probably have more skills than you do at that particular thing, but you still have to be able to know enough about that subject to be credible and to be respected as their manager. And I think that's one of the most difficult pieces. Have you wrestled with that at all?
Yeah, so it's really interesting because I can see both sides, right? There's kind of the school of thought that is like, well, as long as you know how to coach that person for growth, it doesn't matter if you know the thing or not, right? Because like you're focused more on like coaching them to be a better communicator, a better collaborator cross-functionally. And then there's a school of thought of like, okay, well, you should have done the thing first before you hire someone to do the thing. And I like what you said because it kind of meets in the middle of like, at least you have some foundational knowledge of the thing to be able to flex into both spaces, right? And I think that that's where kind of like middle management comes in, right? Where it's like you add additional layers of someone who can do that type of thinking for you so you're not getting too stuck in the weeds. But I haven't really wrestled with that because I'm kind of in a unique position where every person that I've hired, like I've done their role before in some way, shape, or form. But I have seen that come up with, especially first-time people managers, where they might like the scope of their role might expand and they're managing a function that they've never managed before, but they have to hire people for it, and you kind of get a bit of like imposter syndrome coming up. So it can be really difficult, but I fortunately haven't had to deal with that as much.
Yeah, it can be really tough. And I think that's also like the whole concept of like being a generalist or not being specialized can get a bad rap. But the higher that you grow in your career, the more generalist you have to become because you have to be able to cover a wide range of topics. And so I think it's a really good takeaway is that if you want to, if you do have the desires to grow into management and leadership, right, you have to maintain a level of depth around everything, but you have to know also when it's time to replace yourself with someone that can do that thing deeper than you.
Yeah, absolutely. And I mean, from the folks that I have on my team, I've learned so much from them, right? So even though I might have some foundational understanding of what the thing is or how something should look or how something should work, obviously we're in a very fast growing environment, so things change day to day, and they taught me a lot of things that I didn't know. A new way to engage a prospect, new inventory type. When we look at our advertising platforms that I haven't advertised on before, we're launching channels that I have never in my career advertised on before, and I have folks on my team that I trust to be able to stand that up really well. So you have to also be open to learning as well as a manager, and also being okay with admitting what you don't know, right? I think as managers, we kind of face the pressure of always having to have the right answer or having an answer all the time. And it's okay to admit you don't know something. And I'd rather go to my team and be like, I actually don't know, but here's my point of view, and working with them on that together versus pretending I know something that I don't know.
Yeah. And I think that's particularly difficult in marketing. I'll never forget this, right? I had a friend in the agency world, and he's like, people would rather spend money on TV because they've been doing it for years and they're not going to get in trouble for that, versus like take a risk and try out like a new channel. And I think it's the marketing has proven channels, right? And when someone's asking where the budget's going to go that doesn't know marketing that well, they just mainly want to hear, okay, so you go to something that feels proven. And so when you're exploring new channels, that can be really tough to kind of build momentum in that way. Let's actually, I want to talk about that specifically a little bit more later, about like getting buy-in from the CFO, but just like staying on you here for a second in terms of this growth at Alma, right? Like you guys have, 10x growth in 3 years is crazy, especially in given what the environment's been like. So how has your own growth transformed professionally? How have you changed? How have you leveled up your game? Like, what have been those biggest reflections personally for you over the last few years?
Yeah, so it's such a good question. I think when I reflect back on Alma's growth and then in parallel my growth, I think I've been more open to leaning into risks, but it's kind of like smart risks. Like, what are risks that I feel comfortable making that if something goes wrong, I'm not putting the business in jeopardy? So I would say that from a growth perspective, I've really have had to learn what that balance is. And usually it requires like extreme stakeholder management, like making sure that I have buy-in from the CFO to try something new, to your point, like a new channel, making sure that my VP of marketing understands why we want to try something or what we want to bet on something. And sort of the philosophy that has helped ground me in that is kind of this crawl, walk, run philosophy of like, okay, when you start something, you don't need to run. You can start small and you can crawl and sort of think about what's that MVP of what you're trying to achieve, and starting there and showing incremental gains. And that's sort of how I think about getting buy-in as well, where it's like, I don't want to hit a home run off the bat, but I want to start showing incremental changes over time so that when I do make a big ask or I'm going to make a big bet, I have all of these like receipts to follow to show that, okay, I've been making these small incremental changes over time. This is the results that it's driven. Now let's go big because I can see that this is going to drive X. So I would say really anchoring on that philosophy of crawl, walk, run, and just making measured and calculated risks has been a skill that I've had to develop while being at Alma, especially because for Alma, like 80% of pipeline comes from inbound. That's my team. So, it's not like it's 30%. It's not like it's 20%, like in most standard B2B companies. So it's like, if we make up 80% of pipeline and we make a wrong move, or, we miscalculate a certain risks, like we're putting our entire pipeline almost in jeopardy. So it's a lot of pressure as well in making sure that we're balancing where we kind of make bets, to your point.
Have there been, I would love to hear a story or two about some of the risks you guys have taken. I'd love to hear a contrast, one that worked out really well and one that didn't work out so well.
Yeah. Oh gosh. There's quite a few. So, I think about 2 years ago, we were looking at advertising on Google and using this new product that Google launched, which is good for direct to consumer brands. So like if you're buying a sneaker, like you would want to use this type of advertising product that they sell. And we wanted to try it, but I didn't think much of it in terms of like, oh, well, what will this do to our pipeline? Is this really right for our business? And we ended up launching ads with this sort of program, and we started to get an increase of bots coming in, filling out our forms, filling up our AE's calendars. It was like a disaster for a month, where I think like maybe like 70% of our leads coming inbound were just like spam bots, and the AEs were like, what's going on? Luckily we caught the mistake early on. So like the week of us launching, we knew something was wrong, and we got rid of that advertising product. And I think the lesson there is kind of like, just because something works for everybody else doesn't mean it's going to work for you. And you should really take time like validating what's right for your business versus like what is everybody else doing, and sticking to that. So that's one of the scenarios I think about. What other scenario I think about? Yeah, there's one other scenario as well that I think about, which is a bit more on a grander scale, where we have a really solid referral program, right? So like a provider of Alma can refer a friend they know, and the process was really manual and clunky. So I was focused on, well, how can we automate this process to make it easier for our marketing operations and our sales operations team to manage this referral program, and also make it easier for our customers to understand what is the status of their referrals, like a little dashboard and everything. We spent like 3 months validating a tool, collecting RFPs, making sure that everything integrates perfectly with our tech stack, so much so that we didn't accurately forecast, well, the switching, like what would happen when we switched to this automated process, like what would happen to our pipeline, what would happen to user behavior. We were so focused on getting it right from a technical perspective that when we switched the tool, we saw like a 30% decrease in like just like referrals coming in. And referrals make up a huge portion of our pipeline. So we were like, oh my gosh, and like for 2 months, we were kind of like, what did we do wrong? It was like a whole conversation. And the lesson there as well was kind of like, remember to like kind of zoom out and look at the bigger picture, because we were so focused on the technical aspect of it that we lost sight of, well, how will this impact our pipeline? How will this impact our customers and their behavior? Now we're okay, but for 2 months, I was very nervous.
The way that the new tool changed how people interact with the referral program, how did you guys fix it?
Yeah, I mean, we kind of did like a pros cons list of, do we want to switch to the old experience or do we want to stay with the new experience? And ultimately, we decided to stick with the new experience. And basically, what we should have done better was estimate how long it would take for user behavior to change from one way of referring to another way of referring, because the whole experience changed, right? So what we did is that we kind of just like reforecasted what referrals would look like. And now when we launch like a new project or a new tool, I always think about anti-goals now, which is kind of like, when we do this thing, what shouldn't happen, right? We shouldn't see pipeline decrease. We shouldn't see leads decrease. We shouldn't see, and doing that before you launch something can really help in kind of uncovering, what are questions that you still need answered before you do this new initiative or launch something different.
Yeah. I'm going to go slightly deeper on this. In terms of the referral behavior, what did the old referral experience look like versus the new one?
Yeah, so the old experience was like, let's say you're a member of Alma, like you could fill out a form to refer me, right? Like
it's like a Google form or a type form or something.
Yeah. And then one of our BDRs would reach out to me and be like, Jason referred you, like, are you interested in learning more about Alma? And the new experience was like, well, Jason, now you have a unique link that you can share anywhere. I see that link, but it's up to me to fill out the form. You're not filling out the form on my behalf. So the leads were actually higher intent, because it's not someone else filling out the form, but the volume drop was so drastic that it kind of overshadowed the lead quality for a bit. Like the lead quality improved like significantly. It was like from 60% to 80% like lead to op conversion or something, right? So it was pretty significant, but the lead volume drop was pretty big.
And that, like, obviously there's that difference between like that 60 to 80% where, okay, there's more leads, can sales close that gap, right, when they're talking to these folks, and that's like the equation that you have to figure out. But I think it's good to hear that too, right? It's like understanding how people are going to interact with these little things can be really important. And I think the other thing too, in terms of these last couple scenarios you gave, is that you kind of have to do this, I don't know, like some people call it like the stack method, or where like whenever I'm going to someone with a big project, my approach is I want to give them the vision of what it should look like at scale and the goal of that. But I also want to very clearly communicate that I'm just trying to test like the minimum viable milestone right now. I don't care about stages 4, 5, and 6, right? I just want to see, okay, can we validate stage 1? My last company we did this was some email marketing. You're like, hey, before we build all, which you and I spoke about actually, right? We got some advice from you on this. Like before we build out all these if-then statements on these audiences and what emails they get, it's like, can we just get people to respond to the first email campaign? Then we can start building out additional sequences from there. So I think that kind of approach to big projects is something that served me really well over the last few years.
Yeah. No, it's really crucial. And I think as marketers, we also face kind of the both ends of the spectrum, where it's kind of like we want to drive quality leads, but if you're kind of like in an SMB business, then it's a high volume business as well. So it's like any dip in volume is going to raise an alarm, and it's kind of like that constant re-education of, more leads doesn't necessarily equal more pipeline. It's better quality leads equals better pipeline, right? So that's always as well the challenge. So when the leads drop, it's kind of like, what's going on? Because we're used to seeing a high volume of leads, and it's like, we'll focus on the quality, right? But to your point, definitely taking an MVP approach is definitely important.
Telling sales their leads are going to drop is never an easy conversation.
No, it's never an easy conversation, that's for sure. So the trick there is not to say leads will drop, it's to say the quality will get better.
Yes, exactly. It's all in how you market it internally, right?
Yeah.
All right. So in kind of these big projects or forecasting and budgeting, this year, the past like 18 months, everyone's talking about budgeting, and you're selling to the CFO, and that's whether from a sales perspective or internally, right? Trying to get budget for stuff. So how have you been able to convince your CFO to give you guys the proper budget for this year?
Yeah, so that's such a good question. And I know that a lot of people struggle with this. And something that I think about is just, one of the things that I did when I first joined is that I just spent time with our CFO. I spent time understanding what numbers is he looking at, what matters to him, what makes an investment worthwhile in his eyes. And every time I wanted to influence a certain metric or introduce a new metric or a new way of measuring a new campaign, a new program, I always spoke to him about it first. And he always approaches me from a place of curiosity and seeking to understand. So when he comes to me with questions, I look at it less of I have to be on the defense and build a business case, and I more look at it from the perspective of like, this is just someone who is curious, and I answer his questions assuming like he's coming from a place of curiosity. So that already kind of lowers the kind of that friction point of, oh my gosh, the CFO is coming to me asking me about something, right? So that's one, just focusing on what's important to him and making sure that the relationship is one that's coming from a place of curiosity. And then two is it kind of goes back to what we were talking about before, where it's kind of like MVP and looking at stages of launching something. So I tend to make smaller asks where I'm like, okay, I want to make the small ask and I want to prove it out. And this is what I'm hoping to see. I tend to underpromise and overdeliver. So I'll share conservative estimates of like, by investing this much, we should see like our close ones increase by like 20% or 30% or whatever it is, right? And then sometimes we surpass that, sometimes we hit the benchmark. And it's that consistency that I think he appreciates and makes the conversation easier, where we're consistently always meeting our goals or surpassing our goals. And it makes it a bit easier to engage in dialogue. And he also sees how much our team values our relationship with sales and how we're all focused on making sure that we're driving revenue and efficient revenue at that point. So we're not focused on like, well, we just want to have like a TV ad, or we just want to have like a billboard somewhere. It's like, no, like our goal is to drive pipeline, and this is how we're going to measure success, and this is how we know it's going to be efficient or not. So like having those three things like answered are also important.
Yeah, I think that makes lots of sense, right? Showing him that you care about what he cares about, right? Which in this case, obviously he cares about cost, but he also, as a CFO, he's going to very much care about revenue and understanding that pipeline. And then I think that what you brought up there in terms of like the stage-based approach is so important, is that with every relationship you have a credibility meter, and that thing can go up and down. And if you take a big swing at something and you miss, your credibility is probably going to go down. So instead, if you can build smaller stages and say, hey, I'm just trying to prove this out, so it's less risk for you to say yes to me, and we'll have a better conviction afterwards whether it's good or not. It gives you a chance to limit the damage to your credibility if it doesn't work out, but also lets you continue to like stack your credibility with that person.
Yeah, absolutely. I think trust and credibility are two important things. So, and one way that I think about building credibility is also just making sure that I'm never over budget, right? So that's like a pretty easy way, always looking for ways to drive more efficient gains with less money, right? So wherever possible, we try to save money because it also makes him look good when he's in front of the board. So that's also something that we focus on our team. How can we get more efficient with what we have?
I might need you to say that a bit louder for the folks in the back, that you are never over budget. So I'm curious, like any particular conversations you guys have had this year about these projects or budgets that you needed, and how you've actually built kind of a stage-based approach to it?
Yeah, so we're starting that now as we think about our forecast for the following year. And a lot of those conversations are sort of centered around a lot of unknowns, where we're either investing more, doubling down on brand awareness, which has historically always been very hard to measure, or we're expanding into new channels where we just don't know what results it will drive. So we're kind of moving into this territory with a lot of unknowns, or we're doing something for the first time, and it gets a bit difficult in terms of like, well, what can we predict, right? So it requires a lot of research. It requires answering a lot of questions. So all the conversations are centered around, well, what makes an investment worth it if we're trying something for the first time, and how much do we need to invest to actually even see any sort of results? So those conversations are starting now, but they're very early stage.
Yeah. Is there, I guess I'm curious just to get to something a bit more tactical on that, or something that we can grasp a little bit more for the audience. Are there any channels you can speak about, whether that you're thinking about for next year, or that you were thinking about going into this year, that you wanted to test out, and how those tests went?
Yeah. Oh, this one might be hard, Jason, because we're just literally having those conversations now. So I might not have anything.
All good. Hey, was there anything, I guess, let me ask you this, for 2023 so far, what has been the best money that you guys have spent on the marketing team?
Okay, that's a really good question. The best money we've spent as a marketing team in 2023 has been, let me think. I would say that it's our continued investment in actually, there are a few different ways I can answer this, right? Because with demand gen, it's kind of like it's a sum of all of its parts, right? So the engine works because everything else is working efficiently. So when I think about investments that we've made in 2023 or bets that we've made, I think about the event space. I think you'll find that a lot of demand gen marketers, a lot of B2B thought leaders, especially on LinkedIn, are like deaf to trade shows, deaf to events. But events and trade shows have been really great for us. It's a channel that we're starting to stand up now in terms of just like field marketing as a whole. And we've partnered with a few important leaders in the space, in the mental health care space. And every time we go to an event, our brand awareness increases, traffic to our site increases, and we start to build a pipeline that we can tap into for when we expand into other geographies as well. So I would say that events have been a really great investment, but it's definitely at that run stage versus that. I mean, it's at that crawl stage versus that run stage. So it's very early on, but I think it's one that we've made good bets on.
Is there anything unique to your event strategy that you think has been paying off well?
Yeah, it's a really great question. I would say that something unique is that we're focusing more on um, associations for mental health care providers. I think when people think of events, and this is something that I think a lot of demand gen managers kind of do incorrectly when they start a new job, is that they kind of rinse and repeat the same playbook regardless of where they go. So they're thinking about Gartner and all of like these other big names. And it's like, well, you need to double down and understand like where your audience is and what actually matters to them. So for us, that looks like focusing on events that are associations for mental health care providers based on license type. They're really small and really niche, but over time that adds up and does drive incremental growth for the business. So that's what we've been focused on. And I think it has worked really well for us.
Yeah, I think that makes a lot of sense. And there's a big difference between going to a Salesforce conference versus going to like a very niche community focused event. And it's funny because I was speaking with this guy, Morgan J. Ingram, who you may have heard of or seen on LinkedIn before, but I recorded with him like a week or two ago, and we've got the newsletter recap coming out tomorrow, where one of his things is people are doing events wrong. And so I think he agrees with you in a lot of ways that like the standard approach of like getting your salespeople there, kind of like twiddling their thumb, is not going to be very effective, especially for most B2B organizations. And they're just like scanning badges to hit their quota, versus going to something that's like much more niche where whoever you have there can speak pretty authoritatively to whatever is going on. Versus something that's like super wide cast is probably a much more effective event strategy than going to like the massive events.
Yeah, no, I 100% agree with that. And I think that one of the reasons that ends up happening as well is because when teams are looking at events, they're thinking about it already from like a demand capture standpoint. Like that's what they want to do to prove that it's a viable investment, right? And really what you have to start out with is looking at it as a brand awareness or a demand creation strategy, right? So when we think about events, we don't put goals on our sales team. We're not like, if you attend this event, you have to scan X amount of leads, you have to close X amount of deals that came from this event. We're very focused on what is the goal for us as a marketing team? What are we monitoring to make sure that this is driving the results we want to see? And that also makes it a bit easier for sales to engage and want to go to these events as well and meet providers as well. So I agree 100% where I think anybody who's looking at events purely from like a demand capture standpoint is going about it the wrong way. And there's just so much that you can do when you think about community-led events as well, and what that does for brand awareness.
Yeah, I think that's an awesome takeaway. So on another note, I had read a Marketo case study featuring you and Alma that you guys were able to book an additional $4 million in revenue that was attributed to marketing. And I know obviously you were saying before that 80% of inbounds coming from you guys. So help us understand what made you guys so successful, or like why Marketo wanted to feature you guys because you were so successful.
Yeah. Oh gosh. I mean, I guess that's the secret sauce, right? It's like what makes us stand out. I think that one of the things that we focused on early on was getting our foundation right. And, we were just talking earlier about what did the team look like and what did my role look like when Alma first started, right? As a demand gen manager entering a new role, you want to show value right away. So often that means that you're going to be focusing on setting up nurtures, spending more on paid advertising to drive more pipeline for the sales team, right? And I didn't do that. I focused more on getting our marketing automation platform right, making sure that we understood our Salesforce instance, making sure that like I was able to understand the data that was in there, that there was data integrity, and getting that right before we started to add more to our programs, to our email campaigns, to our paid advertising and stuff like that. Because now that these programs have scaled, they're quite complex in nature. We're doing multiple touches to one person. We're doing like ads and an email, and then like the outbound team is like engaging with the person. So it's multiple touches at the same time. And if we didn't have a solid foundation, we wouldn't even be able to tell the story of marketing drives 80% of pipeline. We were able to drive 4 million in incremental revenue. So it's really about getting that foundation right. And some people don't have the luxury of time. So it's kind of like, what do you do in parallel while you're building this foundation to show that you're driving value for the business, right? So that can be like a tough challenge to balance. And for me, what that looked like is like, okay, while I was getting the foundation right, I was making tweaks in the programs that already existed. So instead of layering on or creating complexity, I was like, what can I improve from what's already there that's going to show incremental value, show incremental gains? So it's really about making small changes over time that drive high impact, really.
Well, that's such a good lesson to talk about because especially in early stages, right? You're constantly struggling between building infrastructure versus like testing things out or fixing the things that are out there in the wild. And obviously you guys did a great job setting up the infrastructure and layering on top of that over time to be able to do this because like campaigns and outbound efforts can become very complex really, really fast. Was there any stories that you remember from those early days of like some of those trade-offs that you consider as like, hey, we could spend more time building out the infrastructure here, but we really got to test this out, or we're just not ready to test this out. We need more infrastructure.
Yeah, I mean, that was definitely a constant conversation when I first started. I remember looking at my 90-day onboarding doc, right? It was like a little janky Excel, which was cute. And one of the projects for my first 90 days was to launch a win-back campaign. And I was like, I cannot do this if we are sending emails from MailChimp, if Salesforce and MailChimp aren't even speaking to each other. Like, it doesn't make sense, right? To launch such a complex email campaign or email program when we don't even have the foundation right. So instead, I kind of had to divert attention to like, well, this is what I think I should focus on that's really going to drive impact and value, and we can save this for another time, right? So it's kind of like a game of negotiation as well, and also influencing in terms of like, it's kind of like not saying no, but more like not right now. This is what we should focus on right now, and being comfortable in saying that as well, and standing your ground is really key.
Yeah. I think that's a great lesson to always be reminded of, especially at the early stages, right? You're always going to have these trade-offs and battles to consider. All right, let's talk a little bit more, just kind of some of your personal and career reflections. You've built what I would objectively say is a pretty successful career so far, and you've picked some great companies to work at. Who's been the most influential person in your career, and what did they teach you?
Yeah. Oh gosh, it's such a good question. When I think of this question, I think about a boss I had 2 jobs ago. He was probably the most influential boss I had. And the reason he was the most influential boss I had is because he was a sponsor to me. And this is a conversation that I have with a lot of folks where we talk about the difference between a mentor and a sponsor, right? Everybody's kind of like, oh, you need a mentor. Mentorship is so great. And I have a hot take where I think sponsorship is more important. I would take a sponsor over a mentor any day, because a mentor is going to talk to you about what you should do, how you should act in a certain situation, but a sponsor is going to talk about you when you're not in a room, in spaces that you're usually not in, and they're going to make sure that opportunities that you didn't even know were available are made available to you. And he was someone who was a sponsor throughout my career, throughout the 5 years that I worked with him. He would put me in front of CEOs, CFOs to make presentations. We were going through a complicated merger and acquisition. I had to present to the CMO of the other company. And he always just had a deep sense of trust and just confidence in what I could deliver. And he always guided me in the right way. And I would say he's definitely the most influential for that reason, because if he didn't sponsor me, I don't think I would have had the exposure or the knowledge or the career trajectory that I've had so far.
That's awesome. Did you realize that he had taken on this type of sponsor relationship in the moment, or is that more looking back that's how he was serving?
That's a really great question. You don't realize it until afterwards. And it wasn't until after I left that role and I realized how my dynamic was with other senior leaders or with managers that I had after I reported into other people, that I realized, wow, this is very different. Like, this is I used to have someone that would be like, Carmen, I spoke to so-and-so about you, and I want you to do X, Y, and Z, or prepare this presentation because we're going to stand in front of X, Y, and Z. So it really wasn't until afterwards that I realized that I had a sponsor.
How has that impacted how you manage people?
Yeah, that's definitely impacted how I manage people for sure. I am, first and foremost, always a sponsor. I'm always looking for opportunities that line up with the growth paths of folks on my team. I spend about, once a month, I have conversations with my direct reports in terms of their career trajectory and their growth areas. And then we spend a lot of time thinking about, well, what does the business need and what's the overlap so we can carve out these spaces for you. So anytime I'm in a room with senior management, I'm not talking about what I've accomplished. Like, my success is the team's success, right? So when I'm talking to senior leaders, when I'm preparing our monthly business review, I am calling out their names and I'm saying, this person launched this campaign and it drove this result. I'm not saying the demand gen team, I'm calling out their names specifically. So that's definitely one way that I do it.
I think that's an awesome takeaway for any managers out there, and ways that they can praise in public, right, and try to shine the light on their direct reports. I think that goes a really long way, both in the eyes of smart managers above you and as well as for your the people that you're managing. So you've joined some early stage startups now. Has there ever been a time where you felt like giving up, or what have I got myself into, and how you've gotten through that?
Yeah. Yeah, I would say, sometimes I still think that, right? I love Alma, but sometimes I still think that, being in a startup is definitely not for people who are looking for consistency and are expecting their day-to-day to look the same. My day-to-day looks different every single day. And I have to be comfortable with that, right? So when I think about moments where I was like, oh my gosh, what have I gotten myself into? I think about moments where I was made an ask that I have never done before, or I was told to do something that I was doing for the first time, and I started to feel nervous about am I even going to do this right? And I will tell you that the first time I joined Alma, in the first 3 months, I was asked to build a forecast for our expansion to Massachusetts. I had never forecasted before, Jason. I'm a forecasting pro now, but Alma was really the company that put me in the position to forecast. And I remember telling my boss in a conversation, I was like, usually I'm used to the CMO doing this. And she was like, you are the CMO of your function. So you're, let me know what you need to do this, but I think you can do it. And she always has always had such confidence in what I can deliver. And I was just very honest. And I remember having a conversation with our CEO, and I said, this is the first time I'm doing this. Here's a little janky Excel of what I've put together. And he spent an hour with me, Jason, teaching me how to forecast properly. And that's really rare. And he's still so accessible, even though we're a 500 people company. But I remember he sat with me for an hour, just going over the numbers and being like, this is what you want to do here. This is what you want to call out here. And I will never forget that moment. So kind of what stands out to me there is just being okay asking for help as well. Again, we don't have to have all the answers. I'm in my role for a reason. And it was nice to have the support I needed to be able to deliver what was asked of me.
Yeah, I think there's a great lesson in there about taking an ownership mindset of your role as much as possible, no matter what role that is. And I think too, for any leaders out there, is that your CEO, my guess, doesn't remember that conversation he had with you, but you do, and you will carry that with you for the rest of your career. And that will impact how you try to give time to other people that are showing effort, right, and coming to you for help. And I think that's really important for leaders to remember, is that most of the conversations that you have with your folks are going to make a much bigger impact on them than they will on you. But that is what is going to get them to ring the bell the next time when things are going really tough, or they're unsure about stuff.
That's so well said, Jason. I couldn't agree more. I brought it up to our CEO, and you're right. He doesn't remember the conversation, and I absolutely do. It will always stick with me. And to your point, as leaders, we don't realize sometimes the impact we have on other people and how much people look to us for influence and direction. And that's a lot of pressure. And at the same time, that's why it's important to understand, like, what are our values as leaders and making sure that we're creating space for those values to show up.
Yeah, absolutely. Thinking about your own marketing career, and there's some people that studied marketing or wanted to get it from the beginning, and there's other people that fall into it and have some kind of light switch moment. Has there been any experience that has changed the way that you've thought about marketing or what's possible with a well-run marketing machine?
Oh, yeah. I mean, I think, I kind of have an interesting career trajectory where, as a marketer, for the majority of my career, I always reported into a sales function. So I was always used to marketing being sales enablement or being part of sales or being focused on driving revenue for the business. And in my career, there was a moment in time where I moved from reporting into a sales function into a marketing function. This was way before Alma. And I saw like that tension between sales and marketing, where marketing had their own separate goals and they were like, oh, sales is always asking for all this stuff. We don't want to work with them, blah, blah, blah. And it wasn't until that moment that I realized that that's how a lot of people think marketing should be, of like marketing is very separate from sales. We have separate goals and stuff like that. And I didn't want it to be that way. I was like, I cannot do this. Like, I'm so used to working so closely with sales. I value that relationship. So when I think about moments where my own notion of marketing was challenged, I would say that, where it's kind of like marketing has to be its own separate domain that, as people like to say, makes things pretty, or like does the TV ads and stuff like that. And it's like, no, marketing can be a revenue driving engine. And marketing can work closely with sales, and it doesn't have to be an antagonistic relationship. It can be a collaboration. And having that perception challenge was just like very interesting to me. And ever since that moment, I've always made it a priority to work for companies where the relationship between sales and marketing is really tight. Like, if I get any sense of like that there's friction, that goals are not aligned, if marketing is not talking about how they drive revenue for the business, I'm not interested.
Man, that's gonna be music to a lot of sales leaders' ears. Is marketing is not focused on how they can drive revenue to the business. I think that's awesome to hear. And particularly as teams have consolidated a bit over the last couple of years, I think a lot more marketing teams have started to focus on that. But a lot of them are too late to be focusing on that. So looking back at your career so far and just like your life in general, is there any advice that you'd give to your younger self on how to approach any big problems?
Oh gosh. It kind of goes back to that story I told you about our CEO, Harry, and how he helped me with the forecast. And I think what I would have told my younger self is, ask for help earlier, ask for help often. I think that, I always took ownership of my career to an extreme, to the point where like I was highly autonomous. And even during certain moments where I was struggling or needed help, I didn't ask for help. So I think that that's what I would tell my earlier self. It's not a sign of weakness. It's not a sign of incompetence. Look at help as a force multiplier to whatever you're doing. And I've gotten more comfortable with asking for help more often these days.
I love that. Look at help as a force multiplier for what you're doing. Yeah, I think I felt the same way often, is that, I can just figure it out myself. I don't need to get a coach, or I don't need to ask someone for help on this. But what you're really doing is you're shortchanging yourself, because you're going to spend a lot more time trying to figure something else out that someone else has already made the mistakes or has the experience to tell you, give you a better sense of direction to go. And oftentimes when you get just that little bit of help, it can save you tons of time and frustration, and helps build that relationship with that person as well.
Absolutely. 100% agree.
All right. The final question that we like to get people out of here on is there any other lesson or piece of advice that you think about almost daily?
Oh, this is a good one. A lesson or piece of advice I think about almost every day. When I think about this question, I mean, this might not be the answer people are looking for, but
There's no right answer.
there's no right answer. But I think about the fact that the work will always be there tomorrow. This is something I tell myself every day. And the reason I tell myself that every day is because, especially with the pandemic, and working from home, work has definitely dominated the majority of our lives. And we spend more time working than we probably did when we used to go into an office. And there are moments where I'm sitting at my desk and it's like 7 p.m., 8 p.m. And I'm like, I really need to finish this report. I really need to finish this deadline. And the reality is that when I shut my laptop off, it's still going to be there tomorrow. The work is going to be there tomorrow, right? So I would say that that's something I tell myself every day, especially as I think about work-life balance, because if I'm not at my 100% best, I can't give my 100% to my team. I can't give my 100% best to the company. So that's something that I think about.
Yeah, I think it's a great lesson. I mean, something I've been thinking about a lot recently is that what our life becomes is how we spend our time. And if you're spending all of your time working, right, you're going to look back when you're 80 years old and you look at your life and say, that's what my life was. It was lots and lots of work. And that doesn't mean there's anything wrong with that, right? Like, I think people should do whatever they want to do as long as they're not hurting anyone else. But if you talk to your 80-year-old self and they say, hey, you don't want to look back at your life and feel like all you did was that one thing, or you focused too much in this area, then it's a good way to kind of coach yourself for the moment of, okay, like, it's okay to particularly let the work wait till tomorrow, or focus on something else in the meantime, because one, it's probably going to make you happier in the long run, and two, it's going to make you a better manager, a better employee the next day.
Yeah, absolutely. 100%. I couldn't have said it better myself.
Awesome. All right, Carmen, just final plugs. Any place people can find you or Alma that they should be aware of?
Yeah, so if anybody is looking for a therapist or is a therapist that is looking to grow their private practice, they can go to helloalma.com, and you can find me on LinkedIn. My name, Carmen Cedeño. I'm always available for any conversation or to be a thought partner to anybody.
Amazing. Well, thank you so much for your time. This is awesome. So glad to have you on.
Thank you, Jason.